Clarence Thomas wanted to be a priest. It was not a terribly unusual thought for boys growing up in Catholic education in the 1950s and 1960s. I, for one, have never performed better or more solemnly than I did as an altar boy at St. Brendan's Church in Boston, being on the altar with Monsignor Brandley and Father Leahy and Father Larner, men I admired more than any others in my life, led to thoughts of emulating their careers, which priests call vocations. But in the teachings of that era, you didn't choose the priesthood, it chose you. The Sisters of St. Joseph explained to the boys in St. Brendan's School that we would know that we should be priests, that we had the vocation to be priests if we felt God calling us to the priesthood. Despite my cardinal-like solemnity on the altar in my 10-year-old altar boy cassock and surplice, God didn't call. And by 8th grade, my vocational sights were set firmly on playing left field for the Boston Red Sox, but the Red Sox didn't call either. Clarence Thomas took the priesthood much more seriously than I did. Most seminarians begin their study for the priesthood in college, but Clarence Thomas got an unusually early start by entering a seminary for high school students. He began his college education in a Catholic seminary in Missouri, where he soon concluded, as most Catholic boys do sooner or later, that the strict lifestyle limits of the priesthood were not for him. And so he transferred to the normal life of a college student at the Catholic College of the Holy Cross in Massachusetts, where the football games against Harvard and Boston College and other New England schools were full of the kind of public drunken celebration that students of the priesthood could never experience. Clarence Thomas went on to Yale Law School and eventually a series of politically appointed jobs in government, thanks to Republican sponsors. The New York Times reported this weekend that during those years in Republican-appointed jobs in government, Clarence Thomas was profiled in the Legal Times in an article that described his career ambition this way. He says he plans to be rich, says that means more than just a few $100,000 a year. At the time, a few $100,000 a year was very, very, very rich. That kind of income would have put Clarence Thomas at that time in the top 1% of income earners in the United States. And so Clarence Thomas went in less than 10 years from wanting to be a priest to wanting to be very, very rich, which is a very good reason not to become a federal judge. When Clarence Thomas found himself on the Republican career track that could lead to the federal judiciary, he should have gotten off if he still wanted to be very, very rich. But he accepted President George H.W. Bush's appointment to the Federal Court of Appeals in 1990, and then, of course, accepted the same president's appointment to the Supreme Court a year later, making him one of the least experienced Supreme Court nominees of his own lifetime. And so what's a man to do while living on a government salary and wanting to be very, very rich, or at least once having wanted to be very, very rich? Did the desire to be very, very rich evaporate for him in the same way that the desire to be a priest evaporated for him? Or did some piece of that lust for wealth remain? Enough of it seems to have remained to make Clarence Thomas the most publicly corrupt Supreme Court justice in history. As I have noted before, it is possible that at some point in the last couple of hundred years, we have had a Supreme Court justice who was secretly more corrupted than Clarence Thomas, but that never became public. That's possible, but on the public record alone, no Supreme Court justice in history has ever been more financially compromised than the man who the Legal Times once reported, quote, plans to be rich. This weekend, the New York Times added more reporting to Clarence Thomas's long history of accepting the equivalent of cash for travel and vacation enjoyment. The Times reports Justice Thomas's acceptance of such hospitality apparently predates his time in the court. A former girlfriend said in an interview that a buddy of Justice Thomas had paid for their vacation in the Bahamas in the mid-1980s when he was chairman of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. The Times reports that in the 1980s, Clarence Thomas, quote, struck up a friendship with the Dallas Cowboys owner Jerry Jones and began to taste the good life that he still hoped would somehow become his own. The Times reports that his friendships with billionaires, quote, have brought him proximity to a lifestyle of unimaginable material privilege. For 10 years, Justice Thomas appeared to be one of the justices least dependent on the kindness of billionaires. That is simply because Justice Thomas decided to stop reporting all the massive cash equivalent gifts he was accepting. The Times reports, in his early years in the court, Justice Thomas disclosed about 20 private plane flights and an assortment of other gifts, including cigars, a Daytona 500 jacket, a silver buckle, and a rawhide coat. After the Los Angeles Times chronicled his gifts and travel in 2004, he stopped disclosing private flights and has seldom reported gifts or other benefits. His decision not to disclose many benefits for nearly 2 decades beyond trips related to teaching, speeches, and attending legal or academic conferences, has made it difficult to track potential conflicts of interest. But those conflicts have been found and reported. Billionaire Harlan Crow has lavished more cash equivalent benefits on Clarence Thomas, including literally putting cash in Clarence Thomas's pocket by buying a house that Clarence Thomas partially owned so that Clarence Thomas's mother could live in that house for free. Harlan Crow has interests before the Supreme Court, as all billionaires do. The Times reports that Clarence Thomas's billionaire benefactors, quote, have included major donors to conservative causes with broad policy and political interests and much at stake in Supreme Court decisions, even if they were not directly involved in the cases. It is impossible for Supreme Court justices to pal around with billionaires and not bump into apparent conflicts of interest. That is why distinguished former federal judge Michael Luttig, a Republican appointee, told NPR, quote, I believe that federal judges should essentially live like priests or saints or monks. As soon as you step beyond that, you are at risk of associating with people who could well have matters that come before you or who might well have an interest in the cases that come before you, financial or otherwise. In other words, Judge Luttig believes that Clarence Thomas should live the life that he was studying for in the seminary, but with the additional pleasures of a high government salary and a wife. But living the life of a priest, cut off from worldly concerns in so many ways, was something Clarence Thomas decided he did not have the discipline to do. The reason priests wear long black robes is to communicate instantly to everyone who sees them that they are not of this world. They are not better than anyone else, but they are living a different life than everyone else. The robe is, among other things, an external statement of the sacrifices they have made in their daily lives to serve as priests. It is a statement about the worldly things they have given up to be priests, including any interest in their physical appearance, in fashion, for example, in the kinds of fancy things that are avidly pursued in the real world. The judicial robe is meant to say something similar. The judicial robe is meant to say we are different from everyone else in government. We judges are not political people. We judges live apart from the worldly concerns of politics and find our guidance solely in these sacred texts we have made a priest-like study of. And so Clarence Thomas gets to dress like a priest at work, but Clarence Thomas's judicial robe can no longer hide how his plans to be rich morphed into a plan to at least partake in the lavish lifestyles of the ultra-rich Republicans who have helped Clarence Thomas tarnish the Supreme Court in a way that no justice before him ever has. Clarence Thomas is as unfit for the Supreme Court as he was for the priesthood.